Hello, darlings. Welcome back to this episode. And in the last episode, I was sharing with you a little bit about motherhood and the influence or lack of influence there was in my childhood. And I'm sharing that because it's really important to me that you understand a little bit of the background in the entirety of this story around my pregnancy, because there are so many layers to it, and motherhood and how I was raised on it and my experience of it really shaped a lot of my initial decisions on not wanting to be a mother. There was a lot of trauma in my personal life. There was a lot of trauma in my maternal lineage, and it was something that has honestly terrified me my entire life. You know, this fear around what if I pass some of that on, you know, and my child has a similar life. And there's an emotional weight and an emotional burden that when I tune into that feels so heavy. So heavy that I'm like, do I really want to carry that? And I understand that there's, you know, if I want to put a more positive spin on it and a more positive aspect, it's like I could do everything in my power and pray over her and do all the inner work and do the work with her or him, right? It could be a guy too. But do all of that. And still I recognize, because I am such a walker of multiple worlds, that humanity at large is not all love and light. There is a darkness that exists among us, and so there's only so much any one person can provide, right? And so knowing that is true, there's like that little sliver, there's like that little window where that doubt creeps in, and the burden behind that and the grief behind that just felt so heavy for a really, really long time that I just completely shut out the idea of motherhood. And today I want to talk a little bit more about my family dynamics, because that again is another factor into my history and into, again, sharing these things so you can see, like in one of the episodes, I can't remember if it was the motherhood episode or not, I'm talking about all of the systems that impact the way that we feel, to put a somatic lens on it, right? There's all these systems that impact us, our belief systems, how we think, how we feel about ourselves, about the world, and about how to move in it. And so family dynamics are the first source of information that we receive as kids. You know, we have our immediate family, we have our caretakers. If you had a nanny, you got a nanny, you got your grandparents, you got your immediate family. And that is the first system outside of the system of ourselves where we are receiving information about the world, about what is safe, what is not safe, what is right and wrong, good or bad, how to be, things like that. And so I also want to offer insight into my family constellation, if we want to call it that, my family dynamic, because again, this was a massive influence in my perspective and in who I am as a person. And I want to offer that. I really truly believe in the altar of this moment where I'm recording this and I'm like, wow, strangers are going to listen to the story about me, and maybe they're going to resonate, maybe they're going to hate me, maybe they're going to throw fire on me. I don't know, right? But I trust in what is being put in my heart and the timing of all of this. And my story wouldn't make sense, and it would be impossible for some people to have compassion for me if you did not know this background. And so in today's episode, I'm going to share a little bit more about my family dynamics and the hardship that I've faced in my family dynamic. And it's the first time I really talked very publicly about this. I think I've always just kind of kept this a bit like close to the chest. And, you know, as I'm even reflecting on it in this moment, I'm thinking like, I don't even know if my best friends know of the complexity of my family dynamics, which is just an interesting seed of thought to sit with in that moment. And if that is true, I can fully see that as a self-protection mechanism, right? Like, I think when I was a kid, I used to get pitied. When I would share a little bits and pieces of this story, I would get pitied and I would get so much sympathy. And for a while, the sympathy felt nice because I felt a bit more understood. But as I got older, I was like, yeah, I don't need it. Like, I'm not still in that space, even though, being totally honest and real, of course, I'm still in that space. I'm still carrying the residue of that experience. To deny that is to deny my reality, and I'm here to not deny that anymore, right? To actually like put a little bit of on display, because it's a part of the fabric of what makes me who I am. And I feel like for those who do know me, this insight, it's just like all the pieces start to click together, right? Of why I am the way I am and where that actually comes from, right? And so my family dynamics is, you know, I grew up with a man who I consider to be my father. He raised me. He's a great guy. He's so playful in his spirit. My dad is definitely like, he's the youngest of 3 kids. He definitely has that like younger spirit mentality, rebellious, black sheep, even though honestly, like everybody in my family, like we're just everybody after my grandparents, like they're all black sheeps in their own way. And he always had this very youthful energy. And I know now that it's because he was youthful. Like he was very young when he basically decided to adopt me. And there's a lot of nuance to that story, but I was raised by him. He's not my biological father. But him and my mother were married for a while, and they separated, and he got custody of me. And so he raised me. And my mom was very much out of the picture. I maybe saw her a couple times when I was very little. And the last time that I saw my mother was Christmas Eve. I was probably 3 years old, and she came over to my grandmother's house, and I rarely got to see her. So I remember being so excited about her and being with her. And I spent a lot of my childhood, you guys, at night, most nights crying over my mom, missing my mom, wondering when I'm going to see her, wondering when she's going to come back. I mean, it drove my dad crazy. It drove him crazy. And I think just because he didn't really know or was well equipped with how to deal with that. You know, like how do you speak to a little girl who is really missing her maternal figure, that's crying for her every single night? You know, I would feel my dad's frustration as a kid, and it had an impact on me, you know, when he was like, we're not doing this again, go to bed, you know, like, oh, I was crushed. My heart and my soul were crushed. And as an adult, you know, I have the eyes to see a little bit differently. It's like, whew, I'm not sure how I would respond to that either, right? There's like especially at that age, he was like in his early 20s, you know, so still a baby himself. And so I would cry and I would cry and I would cry for her every night. And it's Christmas Eve. She's at my grandmother's house. And her and my dad are arguing, and I do not remember what they're arguing about, but I remember that I really wanted to go with my mom, and my mom really wanted to take me. And I'm sure she probably said something that was like, yeah, I want to go with you, you know? And I was crying because my dad was saying no. And my mom left, and she told me that she was going to come back. And so I waited at that door all night until my dad had to take me to bed. I sat and I waited at that door all night, and she never came back. And to this day, I have not seen her. And so early in my childhood, there is that abandonment piece. You said you would come back for me, and I never saw you again. That piece, I've had to work so hard on that piece in my life. And, for a long time, I would outsource my love, and I would outsource my security and my safety to other people from this energy of like, will you choose me? Are you finally the one that's going to choose me? God, I hope so. And I would do everything in my power to try to get people to stay, even the worst people of my life, worst partners of my life. I would still fight for them from a deep place of scarcity. And it took a lot of courage, a lot of vulnerability with myself and my own patterns to become self-resourced, and to really truly loving myself into wholeness, to where I don't need anybody or didn't need anybody. And not from this place of like this brash, put my hand in your face, I don't need you. Right? That's a little bit of ego there, and it was never from that place. It was from, no, I recognize that if this isn't working out, I'm going to let it go, because I trust that there is something out there for me that will at some point. And I don't feel very attached to when that is, if I'm honest with you. And so that only comes from like, I'm cool being alone. I love myself. I love hanging out with myself. I've got little personalities, I'm very entertained. And so having that has been really helpful for me and really healing for me. And that was a very big core wound of my life for a long time. And so going back to my family dynamics, it was me and my dad for a long time. I do not know my biological father. I know a couple key parts of information about him, like his name. I know his ethnicity, which is that he's Mexican. That's quite literally it. And so I was raised with my non-biological father, and at some point he remarried, and my stepmom had her own kids as well. And trying to combine, you can hear my kitty, trying to combine these different realities and different ways of being and connecting were hard for us. And yeah, Miko agrees. It was hard. And I always felt like an outsider in my family. I felt so different right away because I was different, right? Like I was different than the other 3 kids who all had the same mother, who all had the same father. Ancestrally in my lineage, there's a difference there. I would have been the black sheep of that family. And so it was hard because in my experience, right, my lived experience in my body through my lens was that I didn't really feel very accepted, and I didn't feel very loved, and I felt like an intruder in that family. And so that was challenging. And in those times, my paternal resource was my dad. And so when I would have a hard day and something would make me cry, I would go to my dad, because I never really received affection from my stepmom. And I never really received affection, like loving affection, like when I talk about in the Motherhood episode, like that purity of love and that purity of like, hey, I'm here with you. I never felt that in that dynamic. And as the years progressed, and my dad went through his own challenges with drug use and things like that, I continued to feel very isolated. And so my bedroom was my part of my safe haven at times. And while I'm growing up, I didn't know that my dad wasn't my biological father until I was about 8 or 9 years old, when my grandfather on my mom's side passed away, because we had gotten a call saying that happened. And somehow that came to fruition in that conversation. And I just remember being outside in my yard. I remember my dad talking to me about it and me just spinning out. Like, we talked disassociation. I don't really remember the conversation. I just remember leaving my body because the information was too much for me to receive, let alone process. Like, what does that even mean? Like, how is that possible? What does that mean? Who is my dad? Who are you? Where is my mom in all of this, right? Like, it's so much for a young child to try to comprehend and also receive the most minimal amount of answers possible. And so that really triggered a deeper sense of isolation. And considering how I was feeling in my family dynamics at the time, it really, like, my abandonment wound was just activated 10 times. Like, where is he? Why didn't he choose me? My mom didn't choose me either. Am I unlovable? What's wrong with me? Right? All these questions that come through. Am I not worthy of being chosen? And then on top of that, being like, what am I doing in this family? Okay, so none of you are my family? And there's this part of the conversation, right, that's like, of course we're your family. We've raised you, we've accepted you, right? We've brought you into our dynamic. Of course we're your family. And there is something unexplainable within me personally when I go, yeah, but we are not blood related. There is something that I am missing primally in my sphere, in my environment, that connects me on a blood level. I do not have that. Where is that? And so I began this identity crisis, and I will just straight up call it that because that is what it felt like for me at a very young age, wondering who I am, who my parents are, who my grandparents are, and it just shifted things inside of me in an irreversible way. And, you know, as my teenage years came to fruition and I got a little bit more embodied in my pain, I guess I would say, how do I even express this? The pain just consumed me. It just consumed me all the time, and it created this lack of safety within me, and there was a lack of safety outside of me as well, and so many questions and so much doubt that I had such low self-worth my whole life. Very low self-worth. And these are some of the factors, right, that impacted that. And again, so when I kind of bring us back into parenthood and I'm examining whether or not I want to have kids, in my early 30s, I'm having this conversation, like, is this biology or like, you know, do I not want kids because of my trauma? Like, what's really going on here? These are all playing a part. These all have a role in how I'm perceiving parenthood in general, which, as you can tell from my stories, not really a good look, right? I didn't really get good vibes when it came to parenthood. I was like, it might be easier for me and my partner to just like do our own thing and enjoy our wealth and travel the world and just kind of like not have to do that. That sounds safe. That sounds safe to me. There's a lot less risk involved in that, other than if my partner dies first and then I die alone, you know? But outside of that, so this dynamic, right, and these questions and this crisis that I'm having constantly just bringing me to my knees in tears often. My childhood was just a series of breaking down in my room, sometimes in my closet, just crying for myself, feeling like God didn't love me, because if God really loved me, my childhood wouldn't have been what it was, which there's more depth and nuance to that, but this is not the episode for that. For the lack of safety that I felt. So I felt abandoned on so many levels. Even though I was here and I was in this family, it felt like a shell to me. Like it was like a placeholder. And because even in that dynamic, I wasn't receiving the love that I needed as a child, right? The love that I needed, me. I just felt alone. I felt misunderstood. I felt like an intruder, like an outsider, like I was just some charity that somebody was like, well, I feel bad for you, so I'm just going to bring you on into the family so you're not out on the streets. And like, even as I say that, it's like that was such a story that I carried, that was such a story. And at some point I grew out of that story, and this has been the experience of what it was for me as a kid. And so all of that is coming up for me when I find out that I'm pregnant. All of that starts coming up for me. Have I healed enough? What do I need to do? Is my life in the right place to bring a baby into this world? Things like that are just really starting to cloud my judgment. And even though I did a lot of work, like when I say I've done a ton of personal development, it's absolutely insane. If you had met me 20 years ago, you'd be like, who is this chick? Like, I'm radically different now than I am. Then I've matured so much. And it's because I've gone on this journey of unpacking these parts, right? When we talk about our family dynamics and ancestral trauma and our lineage and all of that, there's all these components that we have to look at that's like, well, why do I think the way that I think? And why are my behaviors like this? What of these is true to my soul that actually feels true to me as a person versus what are some of these things that I have adapted, right, that are adaptive behaviors because that's the environment that I grew up in. For instance, like sometimes when I speak and I, going back to this like blade of truth energy that I very much carry, there's a certain tone and a texture of voice that my grandfather had, because he is German. All right, so there's an abrasion there, and there's almost this like stouty, don't be an idiot kind of tone of voice. And there are times in my life still where I will hear that tone come out, and I will immediately be aware of it, right? And I will shift directions when that happens. I go, okay, that one got out. Let me retract a little bit. Let me say that with a softer tone and something that feels a little bit more like invitational, right? My grandfather was not invitational. He was very abrupt, and it's his opinion, right? My dad, bless his heart, he speaks in that same tone and texture a lot. And I say bless him because the older that I got, at some point I was like, you cannot speak to me like that. Like, you need to change your tone if you want to be effective with what it is you're trying to say. I know you're trying to say it with love, and also tone and texture matter a lot. And so, it's like things like that, right? That when I was younger, I used to just speak just like that. And I was like, dang, I sound really stern and I kind of sound like a dick. I'm like, oh, but that's not really me. Right? I can trace that down the paternal line. That's like, oh, my dad sounds like that and my grandpa sounds like that. And chances are his father sounded like that also, right? It's like, it's an adaptive behavior. I didn't come out of the womb speaking like that. And so it's like all these things, right? Like that, like how we look at money, how we look at security, how we look at our career, all of these things that get, these nets that get cast over us that say, hey, this is the way you should be because this is the way that I was, and this is the thing that made me feel safe, and this is the thing that worked for me based upon the time and generation that I lived in. We're like, hey, whoa. That sounds a little ancient, don't you think? Like, let's modern it up a little bit. Let's like soften around the edges a little bit. Even though we are still constantly always at war, right? That's like, that energy lives in their bones, right? My grandpa and my grandma were both in the Second World War. That energy lives in their bones, and so that gets passed on. And because I'm in that field, I receive that information. That becomes a part of my personality. Unknown to me, right? I didn't necessarily choose it. I just adapted to it. And so as an adult, then all of a sudden I'm like, I can choose my tone and texture of my voice. Wow, how would I like to be received? How would I like to share how I'm thinking and feeling? And there are times where I come out of the gates hot, and it is abrasive, for sure. I'm not denying that. If you've ever felt that, it's like, woof, that's rough. Those are rough waters sometimes. And sometimes I'm out there just like cutting through the bullshit, right? And it doesn't feel good. For people that are really clinging to those beliefs of themselves, me coming in with a clean knife just feels, even though it's a clean cut, it doesn't feel good. Other times it's different, right? It's this softness that you feel in me. It's this inquisitiveness. It's this curiosity. It's less rough around the edges, because I don't feel the need to be as rough around the edges anymore. And that is something that I'm actively working on, coming out of trauma response as a child, coming out of all of these wounds where I really truly felt like if I left my little safe space, which, to be honest with you, my safe space was built very deep inside myself. I would go so deep inside myself, so deep into the deepest parts of myself that nobody would ever find me there. That's where I felt safe. So you bring me out of that and into my family dynamics, I'm not feeling so safe anymore. You bring me out into my neighborhoods, I'm not feeling so safe anymore. You bring me out into society, I think everybody's here to prey upon me or take something from me or abuse me. So I would just go back inside myself, right? That was my safe space. And there's a lot there that we could continue to unpack together. And I want to give it a bit of time and space to like really let that happen. And so I feel like that's a great place to pause for the time being. And we can continue to pick up where we left off in the next episode. As always, thank you for being here with me on this part of my journey.